Mr. Speaker, I'd like your indulgence to permit me to speak from a seat other than my own.
You do.
Big Rob, easy. Mr. Speaker, I really should thank, if it is appropriate, I really should thank the leader of the opposition and the leader of opposition business, who both conspired to urge me to participate in this debate, because I was not so minded. But after careful consideration, I decided to take part. Even you, Mr. Speaker, would have heard that time come. Or at least is coming. Elections are due, and all things being equal, this will likely be my last opportunity to contribute to a debate in this House. Having been a member continuously for 31 years here, and 4 years in another place where I started in 1989. I entered this House in 1994, May, by way of a by-election. And in a sense, there are many people responsible for that decision to come to the House. In 1989, the Most Honorable Michael Manley said to me, "We are going to win the election, and you can either come as an advisor or come to the Senate and join at Jamaica House." And I said, well, I would come to the Senate. I was at the university and I sought to get leave, which I thought would be short-lived, and it turned out that 35 years after, I am in this House. So I suppose I could thank Michael Manley for that in part. But in truth, I am here because of the people of East Central St. Andrew, who have chosen to return me time and time again. And indeed, I have already handed over responsibility for the PNP organization, which is currently chaired by Councillor Dennis Gordon of the Maxfield Park Division, whom I have every confidence will replace me in this chamber as the Member of Parliament for East Central St. Andrew. I hear he has 2 candidates from the JLP. It's almost like North Central, St. Andrew. I am actually, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, my friend, the Member of Parliament for North Central, St. Andrews here, because he's my good friend. And I have had occasion to campaign against him. I have had occasion to campaign with him. And I was wondering this time what I would have to do. But sufficient unto the day. I want to also thank my family who have stood with me over the years. My wife Sandra is currently overseas. At least one of us have to work for money. And I have one son who, for his sins are mine, has chosen to participate in the political process and is the member for Northwest Manchester. And I have one son in the gallery who is here, Luke, who is also planning to work for money. I want to also thank the staff of the House over the years. The speakers, I have the first speaker I think that I served with was Violet Nielsen. And of blessed memory, and then Carl Marshall, Michael Peart. There are others. You were one speaker, probably as was the member for South Trelawney. And we have had a varied group of persons, but I thank all of them for their service. The clerks of the House, beginning with the Venerable Edley Deans onwards. And I thank them also for their help. All of us here, and I certainly want to recognize my personal staff. Yvonne Lawrence has been with me from the very first day I went to office at Jamaica House in 1989 to this day. And Angela Amir from 1997 when I went to the Ministry of Transport and Works to this day. I want to touch an issue that I think affects others in the House. My driver, employed to the Parliament, has been with me from 1989 to this day. Richard Gordon. But the thing is, when I leave, I have the expectation of a pension paid by the government of Jamaica, all things being equal. But our parliamentary drivers don't get a pension, and it is something that needs to be remedied. So I'll leave it. It's important. It can't be right for people to work 30-odd years and then be at the mercy of just the goodwill of others. I'd like also to express appreciation to the People's National Party and to the numerous comrades and friends of the party, because, truthfully, it is because of the loyalty and support of the party, not mentioned in the Constitution, but all of us on both sides are enabled because of that support. But I also also want to speak to the friendships that have developed on both sides of the House. I find myself at a disadvantage now, and I know it's time to step, because I have to be asking my colleagues, who is that? Who is that? Who is that one over there? I know I could come more often, but you know, when that starts happening, you kind of figure, well, it's time. I know Desmond, because we go way, way back. But truthfully, and this is really where I want to stand, many friendships have been developed over the years. And I am convinced that despite the differences of political philosophy, despite the differences in temperament maybe, we are by and large in this House on both sides seeking the same objectives, the improvement of the lot of the Jamaican people. I can't speak to every single individual, but it is, and it has been a privilege to have been a part of this House, often misunderstood by persons on the outside, often demeaned by ourselves on occasion, but generally we have pursued the interests of the Jamaican people. Despite the limitations of time which you so urgently warned me of, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share some thoughts, some of the lessons that I believe I have learned regarding the processes of governance as I have observed our operations over the years. I hesitated, as I said earlier, and still hesitate, because we are close to elections, and in the fervid atmosphere of elections and election fever, some might take offense, and I have many friends in this House on both sides of the aisle whose friendship I'd like to sustain. But fundamentally, this is my starting point. Namely, that it is worth sustaining our sense of collective purpose in this House. This Parliament, which emerged after universal adult suffrage was achieved in 1944, was the result, is the result, of a common striving for rights by the Jamaican people, which gave rise to two main political parties which survive to this day. One rooted primarily in terms of its origins in the labor movement, and the other in the demand for a national movement for independence. In Jamaica's case, it is worth noting that when the terms of the Jamaican Constitution were settled by a committee of this House that was chaired by the then Premier, Norman Manley, he invited the then leader of the opposition, Sir Alexander Bustamante, to travel with him to London, where the final agreements regarding the structure and content of the independence constitution were settled jointly. We need to think about that. It was a joint endeavor in the end to achieve statehood, to achieve nationhood. And it was a shared endeavor. There was no requirement. He could have set it off by himself at the time. Maybe there are those who say he should have. I don't share that view. Because there's a point for us to, there's an example for us to observe, recognize. And that is the main point that I want to emphasize. That the overarching lesson of our years as an independent nation lies in the fact that all our great accomplishments as a nation have been the result of our collective endeavors. And I think this has been understood for the most part by all our leaders, for the most part. Nothing highlights this more, to my mind, than our efforts to reduce public debt and achieve sustained economic growth. The latter part of that mission has not yet been achieved. We have not secured high levels of economic growth necessary to deliver on the aspirations of the Jamaican people for a better life. As I listened to the member from West Portland describe the savings purportedly, you know? You know, I won't fault it because, you know, we all have so many histories, some like a private histories, some of which I won't share. No, because, you know, I'm not going into all those. Look here, man. There are so many histories. Okay. You know, which could have gone in all kinds of directions. You stay the course. You made me understand some basic things. Comrade is a comrade. And no, I can't, no, man.
That's about 5 minutes. We have to give back
What are the basic facts of our, and I say that with respect to the reduction of the public debt. It's one of our great accomplishments as a country, and to be shared. But what are the facts? For decades, especially since the global economic upheavals resulting from the oil price shocks of 1973, Jamaica has been faced with a problem of large current account deficits in our balance of payments, and collectively we sought to borrow our way to manage, to compensate for these current account deficits. This led to a buildup of unsustainable public debt, low growth, high levels of poverty. As a consequence of these fiscal and monetary imbalances, Jamaica entered into successive IMF programs between 1977 and 1995. 20 years almost. Yes, including the 80s, from that whole period, one of the longest continuous periods of IMF supervision, so to speak. public debt ballooned to in excess of 200% of GDP in the 1980s and brought down in the 90s into about 80% of GDP by the mid-90s, but we were still vulnerable and susceptible to external shocks and to climate-related shocks. The financial crisis of the 1990s, which was resolved without resort to external borrowing, resulted in a massive buildup of the debt, domestic, but public debt, and then the Great Recession of 2008 resulted again in the need to seek external supports because, in a sense, the debt levels are already too high. We all know what was attempted in that first, in the agreement, the standby agreement of 2010, which involved the first debt exchange, the Jamaica debt exchange, the divestment of loss-making enterprises, fiscal restraint, public sector wage restraint, and an attempt to wrestle our public finances into better shape. That program went off course in 2011. Having been agreed to in 2010, it was off course by 2011. The issue here is not to assign blame, but to highlight the factors that led to the success of the IMF program that was entered into in 2013. The fact is that while much has been focused on the contribution of then Prime Minister, Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller, and myself, in my view, much of the commentary misses the essential element that resulted in the success of that program. What we miss is the significance of the united national effort that was involved. Don't minimize, we should never minimize the extent of the sacrifice of the public sector workers who had already endured 3 years of wage freeze and who signed on to 3 more years because they wanted to see their country get out of the vice of fiscal uncertainty. Don't underestimate either the commitment of the bondholders, the pensioners who had invested in Jamaican debt, banks and other investors, domestic and overseas, who agreed to take another haircut. Simply put, because they recognized they couldn't be paid, but decided to stick with the program. Nor should we ignore the extent of the taxation and the tax burdens. My good friend, the member for Northeast Manchester, tossed all kind of epithets every time I had to. I was having pangs of fear every time I had to come to the house and announce a further tax package to the country. He called me Papa Tax at the time. But it was the requirement of the program. In fact, it was a prior condition that we had to close a fiscal gap that was left hanging by the previous administration of 2% of GDP before they would consider a program. And what is, well, the Prime Minister went to Mandeville to promise bitter medicine in the campaign. Gave us a lecture about castor oil and eucalyptus oil. I understood his pain at the time. Sobering. Yes. What I have written, member from West Portland, is that on the day, well, you have to buy the book. On the day that I closed the debate in the 2013 budget debate, I had to call the fund the day before. I said I had 2 speeches prepared. I had opened the debate with a promise of external funding from the fund. But the board had not yet met. It had been a long drawn out. And I said, I can give one. I can close the debate in the normal way. I closed the debate on the Wednesday. I called the managing director on the Monday. I said, I have 2 speeches. I can close the debate in the normal way. But if the board does not sign off, I will be left with no option but to come to Parliament and resign because I can't finance a budget. The board agreed on the Tuesday to the program, which enabled me to close the debate in the normal way on the Wednesday. It was that close. But the truth is, it was the collective sacrifice made by the Jamaican people up to that point that had convinced them in Washington that the whole country was behind the program. And in a time when the world economy is posing tremendous threats to the survival of small countries like ours, as we degenerate into a world of normlessness and an elimination of the rules-based order. It is only this spirit of collective national resolve that is going to see us through these troubled times that are upon us. It didn't happen. This sense of engaging in the public was not purely accidental, but it was the result of a deliberate decision to engage the population. Otherwise, they would never understand what the challenges were. And it was this willingness to be fully transparent that gave rise to the decision to establish EPOC. That's it, okay. But he's generous. Because that was an example not just of oversight, but it unified all the stakeholders. You tell me it was short.
Mr. Speaker, the member's time for speaking having been expired, I beg to move in the traditional sense for an additional 50 minutes to enable him to complete his presentation.
The desired request is on the floor for the speaker, current speaker, an additional 15 minutes. Those in favor? Those against? Mr. Presenter, you have 15 minutes. Member from St. Andrew E. Central. Your mic, please. Your mic. You may continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Much obliged to you and the members of the House. But it wasn't only EPOC. There was the Matalan Committee. The tax reform effort was spearheaded by the stakeholders, and we must give them tribute. And the various sectorial groups, including the Tax Committee of Parliament, which I believe has only met on that occasion to consider. It's provided for in the standing orders twice, but ministers of finance have not wanted to use it. yeah. But we probably should. But it was this broad-based national effort. While we have achieved some measure of fiscal discipline and balance, we have not managed to secure the growth in incomes and productivity that we need, as I've said. Economic growth is the logical and obvious preoccupation of the entire country, which has nevertheless eluded us thus far. Despite the Economic Growth Council and the 5 in 4, maybe, Mr. Speaker, this would be an area for broad-based institutional collaboration among the nation's stakeholders, building on the earlier experiences of the National Planning Council. Just like how the Matalan-led Committee on Tax Reform helped usher in a period of investment activity and profitability, maybe an analogous, not a one-sided political grouping, but an analogous national grouping could help provide us with a blueprint for growth that the entire country could log on to and buy into. The success of successive INF programs lies in the fact that the country achieved the discipline to set targets and make those targets happen. We shouldn't need the IMF to cause us to study for an exam, because we have done that from a long time. But we need to have the discipline to set targets for what we need to do and hold ourselves as a country accountable for those targets. The elements of the growth agenda are clear. education has to be the foundation of what we need to do. And, you know, it's another example, fleeting, short-lived. But when after the Ray Davis Committee reported on educational reform, Eddie Siaga and P.J. Patterson agreed that it would be a joint endeavor. But it lasted, we didn't sustain the effort. The finances weren't forthcoming and crises came upon us. But education remains the fundamental starting point. Lower energy prices, I am pleased that in that regard, that's the second element, and in that regard there's a recognition that there is need for some national collaboration. Public sector reform seems to be forgotten, but necessary as a critical third element. It still takes too long to achieve critical decisions within the public sector. Too long. We have to modernize agriculture. We need to incentivize capital investment for companies so that which suggests another round of tax reforms. We need to incentivize the investment in fixed capital, but also in human capital, in training. There needs to be some sort of tax relief for companies that engage in on-the-job training of their members. And we need to recognize now that we have to develop industrial policy. We have to pick winners and develop industrial policies for those sectors that are going to make the economy grow. We can do it. And we can do it if we set ourselves the quarterly tests, not the fund. If we set ourselves the quarterly tests in each of these areas so that Jamaica can become the gem of the Caribbean, achieving 5 and 6% growth that is needed if we're going to narrow the gap between ourselves and our other regional partners. There are some other areas and examples of our collective effort. Perhaps the most significant one and most salutary and inspiring is the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. Maybe many in the current leadership of the House or in the House may not be aware of the history that gave rise to the ECJ. The immediate antecedents go back to the suspicions and complaints about how enumeration was done in 1967-66. You had prescribed areas and non-prescribed areas with different modes of registration. You could remember all of that. There was the gerrymandering of constituency boundaries, and all of that led ineluctably, inevitably into political violence, which became unbearable. Thankfully, good sense prevailed. With the encouragement and prodding of other stakeholders, the parties decided to establish the Electoral Advisory Committee, the precursor to the currently existing ECJ. The structure of the EAC and subsequently the Electoral Commission is important, with a mix of party representatives, the so-called nominated members, and the independent members, the selected members. For it reflected the fact that it wasn't just the parties that needed a clean system, it was the country as a whole that needed a clean system. But more importantly, I think, Mr. Speaker, is that the formation of the EAC gave impetus to the transformation of what I call a dangerously partisan political culture that had developed. The countless hours spent by political representatives together trying to make the system work, to identify people of independence acceptable to both sides, once we had been consulted by the various governors general. We recognize that no one party in office should try to exercise ownership over the body politic. Rather, we would recognize that we were joint tenants in a collective national endeavor. Changes, new institutions were built. A peace agreement in 1989 was signed by then Prime Minister Siaga, just before the elections, and leader of the opposition, soon to be Prime Minister, Michael Manley. The Political Ombudsman Act was formed in 2002, and I can speak to that because I spent many hours myself, having been designated by Prime Minister Patterson to meet with Mr. Siaga to settle on an appropriate office holder. It took literally months before we settled on Era Blair as the person to be chosen. We established conventions that required Parliament to cede its authority to the ECJ regarding electoral matters, including the determination of parliamentary boundaries. The result has been a growing confidence in our electoral system, the virtual elimination of political violence, and an enhanced reputation for Jamaica's electoral democracy in the world at large. Against this background of history, I don't know myself how it could occur to one side to eliminate the political ombudsman, which had been constructed so carefully by decades of political discussion and togetherness. You were part of the EAC. You know what it took, and others here too. We can do better than that. Let us not forget the lessons of our history. Even more, it flies in the face of our traditions of governance for one side to abrogate to itself the authority to create a new parish, all by itself, without any consideration. Remember, because the heroes of our democracy are on both sides. Hear me. When in 1983, the PNP boycotted the elections. Like it, don't like it, right or wrong. 83. You were born. You would have been. No, forget it. What was significant was that Eddie Siaga amended the law to enable the PNP to participate in the EAC by saying the person who was previously leader of the opposition would have the rights and we continue to function. There were lots of inter-party discussions that took place. Eddie Siaga, who had all the seats in the House, consulted about the appointment of the independent senators. At the time, it was a recognition that despite that there was this jolt in it, it was important to preserve the collectivity of our identity. Nationhood, Mr. Speaker, is not the result of sharing geographic space. Indeed, history is replete with examples of people sharing the same territory but not able to achieve nationhood and engaging in destructive conflict with each other. We see what happened in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, Serbia, Bosnia, where ethnicity and religion paralyzed the possibilities of nationhood. In Northern Ireland, building the Jamaican nation requires the application of good governance, principles of accountability, transparency, integrity. It must also be premised on principles of participation, giving citizens an opportunity to be part of the decision-making process, inclusiveness and equity, and a sense of social justice. The essence of nation building is the creation of shared loyalties and trust in authority and political structure. Most of all, we have to trust each other. And let me just say this. I see a hole in your hammer. Hold on. I crave your indulgence, Mr. Speaker. I need just 2 minutes of your time.
Speaker, member, your time, your additional time is up, but we will allow you an extra 5 minutes to complete. You may continue.
Much obliged, Mr. Speaker. Let me just make this point, Mr. Speaker. In seeking to build this collective ethos, the integrity of the political leadership of the country must not be in doubt. It is vital if we are to build trust. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I am not proclaiming that the Integrity Commission is right in all they do or supporting this or that, but I am saying that if we are to mobilize people to achieve great things, they must believe that us collectively are people of honor, goodwill, and trustworthy. And so we, as much as anybody else, need an integrity commission that works, because it is that which will assure the country that we inside here are people who can be trusted by and large. And we need that, because we do as much damage to each other with allegations as anybody else. So we need the independent body, but that body needs to function. It needs to be independent, and I'm not claiming that they function well. They are irritants over simple matters at times. But the hardware of nation building is important. The roads, functioning water systems, ports, airports. As important, however, is the software of the human relationships, the shared attitudes and values of our people, the treatment that we get as citizens at a bank, at a police station, on the roads, in the hospital, in the government office, how workers and management relate to each other, how we share the benefits of our productive effort, how we protect people's access to good health care good education, security, etc. In that vein, while we applaud the reduction in murders, it's not the same thing as peace in our communities. There is still too much mayhem on the streets. The disaster that was meted out to that nurse lady tells us what can happen, and it happens too frequently. Police and youth in conflict, teachers, parents at war, not to mention students. There have been national calls for values and attitudes to be improved. Against this backdrop, it is hard for me to explain why the Crime Management Oversight Committee, which is the result of not only bipartisan but national effort, including private sector, academics, etc., why has it been abandoned? We should not make our differences of party affiliation or the quest for power blind us to the fact that essentially we all in here, for the most part, seek the same objectives. A better quality of life for the Jamaican people. And in nation building, we need to go together. As we have learned from history, one hand can't clap. It has been an honor and a privilege, Mr. Speaker, to have served in this House. And I thank God Almighty and the Jamaican people who have made it possible. I pray that as we go forward as a nation, we will remember the lessons of our history and seek where we can to unite the Jamaican people and not divide them on any basis, whether political, social, racial. Jamaican people, for the most part, simply want the benefits of modern society. A good education, access to first-rate health care, safety and security, a good school bus system, yes. A good school bus system that works and don't break down on the road. And a social and physical environment that affirms our humanity. Yes, we have underinvested in justice. No, we have over a long period of time. We may have different views about programs and policies, but ultimately the objectives ought to be the same. And we must learn to collaborate if we are to thrive as a nation. I want to thank God Almighty and all my friends in the Parliament, past and present, for the opportunity to have served. May God bless you all in your endeavors as you go forward, and may God bless Jamaica, land we love. I hope that